Hello everybody, welcome to ChinFat. In the last episode I showed you guys how to set up the physical equipment for the GH5s and the Atomos. And in this episode I'm going to be showing you how to do the programming and the setup on the camera and on the Atomos to get this awesome system up and running. So first thing I'm going to talk about is, well, since we got this Atomos that's kind of slaved to the camera, it would be a good idea to put in your SD card into your camera, load that in, because it's going to use that SD card as a trigger. When it detects that that SD card is being written to, it's going to trigger HDMI to the Atomos and record on the Atomos. So we're going to turn the camera on. Flip the switch on the top here to get the camera turned on. And then that wheel on top, you'll want that wheel on top for set up for video recording. You'll want it on the icon that looks like a film camera with the M next to it. It's manual video mode there. So with that, we're going to hit our menu button, the middle center button here, and we're going to scroll up to the first menu, the camera icon with an M. And in that, it's got 2 pages. So I'm going to go over, right now I'm in page 2 of 2, and if you arrow up, you can see we go into page 1 of 2. I'm going to go to exposure mode and make sure this is on manual. You don't want it on priority, auto shutter priority. You want it on manual, so you manually control all the irising. Down on page 2, there's not much really to set up here to get ready to shoot. So we're going to go back to down to the next menu and go to record format at the very top of page 1, and we're going to choose MOV. You can do MP4, MOV, whatever works. But I'm going to go into record quality. And we're just recording on a card here, and this is just going to be basically our offline footage. We don't really need it, but it's just going to be used to trigger the Atomos. We're going to set this up on the 100 megabit per second codec here, and it doesn't need to be really high quality going to the card. And it's going to be 8-bit, but it's always outputting 10-bit and higher quality through the HDMI. So this doesn't have to be high quality in here. It's just used to trigger the Atomos. All right, on page 1 here, we're going to move down to photo style and enter photo style. And this is where you set your LUTs, your lookup tables, or the way you want your image to look. Kind of the most way people will shoot on this is going to be in the Vlog mode, which will give you a very flat profile, and it will give you a higher dynamic range. It'll give you more range for color correction. So we're setting that on the Vlog, on the log format. We're going to go down to page 2 here and go down to the ISO sensitivity. This is just a minimum and maximum ISO. This is a dual native ISO camera. We'll show you how to set it up for the dual native mode where you can shoot in low light. Right now this is set for regular ISO sensitivity, native ISO of 800. So the minimum and maximum there were set. Maximum was set at 1600. We're going to go down to page 4 here. And on page 4, we're going to go to HDMI record output. And under this, you're going to go to info display. Make sure your info display is off. Very important, because when it records to the Atomos, you don't want the info display items to be recorded to part of your image. It will ruin it. And HDMI recording control needs to be on so it triggers the Atomos. So 2 very important things to recording the Atomos you don't want to forget, or you can ruin your footage. To page 5 of 5, there's not really much going on there. Let's go down to the little C with the wrench here, and we're going to go up to exposure. So this is one setting we need to change here. Under exposure, this is where you change your dual native ISO. If you're doing low light, or if you're doing low ISO or high ISO. If you're under low light, you're going to choose the high ISO, and that gives you a different range of ISO. And you'll notice down at the bottom of the screen there, we can now change our ISO to a much higher setting, and it does a pretty good clean image when it's in the dual native ISO setting here. So now your native ISO has been increased. You have high ISO instead of low, but we'll change that back. But you'll notice under the sensitivity here, you have a different range of sensitivity now when you go into the ISO sensitivity mode here. So let's get out of that. And we're going to go back into our exposure. We're going to set this back to the low setting on the ISO there, back to where it was. So we have a native ISO of 800 once again. I'm going to hit the back button, get back to our menu here. So let's go back here. We're going to go down to the next subsetting, which is the wrench. And under page 5 of 5, we have format. We're going to format our SD card here, delete all the information on our SD card. That's page 5 of 5 of the wrench here. But let's go back under the wrench and see if there are other settings that we need. We're going to arrow up and go to the previous pages to 4 of 5. Nothing there. Let's go all the way to the top here. All right, at the top, there's nothing that you really need to worry about. Maybe when you get down to 4 out of 5, there is a sensor cleaning. This will like shake your sensor and kind of clean dust off of it. There's other ways to clean your sensor, but that is one quick way. If there's just some dust on it, it will shake it off. And then going down under my menu setting, you can actually change your shortcuts for the function keys. This has like a total of 5 visual function, actual tactile function keys that you can hit on your camera. And it has a total of a few more. It has a few more function keys on the actual screen that you can touch, but it has 5 actual tactile buttons that you can hit. So we're going to hit function 2 right now. The function 2 button right here above our wheel actually just brings up a quick way of being able to select your picture profile. So the function 1 button here, as you hit function 1, it brings up this little in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, turns your finger wheel on the top to white balance and your finger wheel on the back to your ISO, which is kind of convenient as well, but we're going to show you how to set up your white balance and your ISO as well. On the top here, if we hit our WB button, which is white balance, it'll actually bring up our white balance. And now we have this little adjustment at the bottom. We can set in custom ones. We can set in presets on these little wrench ones. We can set in custom Kelvin if we want to do Kelvin, or we can do it by shade, by sunlight, by incandescent light. We have all these kind of presets for your white balance. So our white balance is set for shady temperature there. We're going to hit the ISO button now and set up our ISO. So our ISO is your sensor sensitivity. We're going to adjust that. Right now it's on 800, but we can now scroll our back wheel. It brings up the ISO setting, and we can scroll it to the ISO we want, select it, and we're done. Now, if you want to get out of a certain menu, you have your little picture taking button here. If you barely push that, just notice it takes you back out of the menu and gets you back into your regular display info screen here. So that's like you're going to take a picture, you just barely push it and it takes it down. I'm going to adjust the iris a little bit on my camera. So let's go to the next function key. It's the function 3 key, and this is actually programmed as a focus tool here. As you hit the function 3 key, what it's going to do is it's going to bring up this little square, and then it's going to zoom up to that square, and you can move that square around, but that's going to zoom up to your image and help you focus. So you have a couple features on helping you focus. One is by zooming up on the image so you can get a good sharp focus on it. I'm going to hit the menu here. All right, now we're going to hit the function 4 key at the bottom here. The function 4 key brings up this kind of leveler here, so you can level your camera. Let's move up to the function 5 key. The function 5 key basically toggles your live monitor and your peaking. In the top left-hand corner, you'll see it brings up a little menu that says peaking as we push through it. And the peaking actually adds a grain. This is also a focusing assist option as well. It's going to bring up a hard grain, a hard blue grain, or you can change those colors in the menu, and you can see that grain kind of coming and going, showing what is in focus on your image, and that's what the function 5 key is at default. It turns off your live screen or goes to peaking, and there we can kind of see that little peaking happening there as we zoom in and out, or as we focus in and out. All right, now the wheel on top of your camera here, if you're not in any menus, this wheel here on top, this little finger wheel, is going to be what changes your iris. That is if you have a digital lens. If you have the Vader primes, you have to change it manually on the actual lens, but you can see the f-stop changing there. And this back wheel here is your control of your shutter speed. As you move this back and forth, your shutter speed will be adjusting. And those are fractions of increments there, 1/100th, 1/50th, and that changes your shutter speed. Now let's go through the functions on the Atomos. Once you have the HDMI plugged in, and might have to change some things to get the input to work properly. If you're working on the Atomos Flame, you won't have to change the HDMI input. But with this one here specifically, the Shogun, I'm going to have to change it from SDI to HDMI, since that is my input device that I'm using. And that automatically detected the 4K for 24 frames per second output that the camera is giving. But your HDMI, it needs to be on HDMI 2.0 usually here, depending on the type of HDMI cable that you have. But we're going to go to the trigger mode, and we're going to turn the trigger mode on for HDMI for the HDMI trigger. We're going to go to HDMI and make sure the trigger is turned on, and that way when you hit the record on the actual camera, it will record on the Atomos. So if we push the button here, it'll trigger it on the SD card, and then the HDMI will detect, and you can see that it started rolling there. And now when I hit the stop button on that on the wooden handle, it'll actually stop recording as well. So we push the button and it stops, and you can see that it will stop here, stop recording. But you always want to double check that, make sure that, because the HDMI output is on and the trigger is turned on. So next here, we're going to go up to our clip settings here. We're going to go to the 4K and look at our 4K settings. That just brings up the record settings. It's the same as the camera. You can't really change that because it's outputting that signal to the Atomos. But next, we want to also worry about the quad link. You won't see this on the Flame. That deals with the SDI output on the camera. But we're going to go to our next one here, the ProRes HQ, the setting here, and change the form if we want to change the format. The highest you need this, the best quality to record in is 422. If you go HQ, that's way overkill for what the camera is outputting. But we're going to go ProRes, and we're going to go ProRes 422. And we got on this card 250 gigabytes approximately. We got like 55 minutes. You can also go to change it to Cinema DNG or DNX codec, but ProRes works just great. So I'm going to hit OK there. And we're set to shoot in ProRes 422. I'm going to go to the naming here. If you click on the name of the file, you'll be able to change the naming convention if you need to change your file names to have a very specific name. You can go in there and change and type in the new letters for it and change what the naming system will be on your card. All right, let's click the card icon up here on the top here, and we're going to format media. So if you need to format your media, that's where you do it. You click Format, it'll format the card, and the card will be emptied and ready to go. Okay, some other settings here. If you need to do some playback of your clips, you hit the play button at the bottom and it'll take it into playback mode, and you'll be able to scroll through your footage. You can grab this little playback tab here and you can scroll it back and forth and scrub through your footage and find the footage. At the top of the screen, you also have your previous and next. You can go from the previous clip to the next one at the top of the screen there. But we're going to hit the record button to go back to our record mode and get out of the playback mode. The menu button has some basic names with date and time, setting different time codes for recording, display options, file naming. We're not really getting into that. Let's get into the scopes on the side here. The first tab on the right-hand side of the screen here brings up on your waveforms. You can show different bits of information here, how bright your images are. You have how bright your image is, how you can bring up a vector scope for color and saturation, and you also have an RGB waveform at the top as well to look at the brightness levels of your individual channels. The next tab here, we've got our monitor assist. If we turn on the monitor assist here, we can turn on peaking, the peaking mode. So when we, this is the same thing that's inside the camera, but now it's on the Atomos screen. As we focus, you see that little blue color there, the grain that comes around what's in focus. You have a false color mode here, so you can tell what your exposure levels are when you change your exposures. It shows what's overexposed and underexposed. It's also very helpful for your overall exposure. You also have an aspect ratio button here. Let's turn that off. Aspect ratio button. So if you're shooting, it does a framing for 1.85 to 1 and 2.40 to 1 for different aspect ratios. And we'll put those kind of little invisible lines on, or it's slightly less than opaque lines on so you can frame for that aspect ratio if you're going to be cropping later on. Let's go to almost the last tab here, and this is where it's really important if you're going to be loading a LUT. If you're shooting in a very flat profile like a log profile, you can load a LUT so you can kind of see what your image would look like if it wasn't in log. And yeah, you can load LUTs on these things. You can go shoot some test footage and load those LUTs later on, and you can have up to eight LUTs there you can load onto the footage that you're shooting, and you can put those on your solid state card, put it in, and upload them right from your solid state card. Well, that about does it for the basics on setting up the GH5 and the Atomos. If you have any questions, please post them. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.